Well, if you follow the show, you're going to agree with this next statement. We are living in a clown world. We are living in a time that has really not been seen, really, I don't think, ever in our country, where there's a constant divide, there's a constant fight, and it really is, there's a tension. Tension that some would say between good and evil. Others would say right versus left. Others would say liberals versus conservatives. Whatever your perspective is, you can acknowledge that there's a serious tension and almost a funkiness going on at the moment. And when you pull up the news, whether it be the CBC or other mainstream outlets, you kind of shake your head in disbelief of what you're watching. And in a lot of ways, it just feels like an utter distraction of what is currently going on. First, let's take, for example, what happened to Ruby Dhalla on Friday, getting kicked out of the race. And again, people taking to CBC to share how they feel about Ruby being kicked out of the race. And it quite frankly just put a bad taste in my mouth. Not a fan of what I'm seeing out there. For an example of what I mean, we have Greg McEachran here, who's worked as a senior advisor for multiple ministers in his time in political strategy. And this was his take on Ruby Dhalla being taken out of the Liberal leadership race the way that she did.
Strangely, I feel a bit relieved. Some of my friends, Liberal friends, talking about the leadership, we found a lot of Ruby Dhalla's social media postings puzzling, to say the least. She was very anti-WEF, which is, based on a conspiracy theory, and you often hear it more on the conservative or the right side. She was pretty vicious in her attacks on Prime Minister Trudeau, on Mark Carney. And, I'm used to that in any leadership race, there are some people that enter it and their intention is for attention. This felt a bit different. And this is something that, we talked about, and whether or not you add fuel to the fire or attention by, retweeting or calling it out. But there was a lot of head scratching going on. I worked on the Hill when Ruby Dhalla was an MP, and there were some problematic issues then, a very well-known McLean story at the time. Not much had been heard from her. And when I scroll through her social media, again, there's the things that I just talked about that, did not seem helpful in terms of, where the Liberal Party is right now after 3 terms, trying to seek a 4th term. These are the same questions we would have been talking about had there been a leadership debate. But if you scroll further back, there's not much in 2024, 2023 around politics, around Canada politics. There's nothing wrong with being an influencer. Do I want one as my prime minister? Probably not.
So catch that, right? He gets CBC airtime to say that the WEF, the World Economic Forum, is a conspiracy theory. And these are the issues and the rhetoric and narratives that keep getting pushed on the airwaves here, that get pushed to the masses, quote unquote, depending on who's actually listening. And to say that, there's just something off about Ruby, just kind of scratch your head about it. Was it the fact that she was the only one willing to really push Carney? Was it the fact that she's speaking about the issues that the Liberal Party wants to keep quiet and keep away from mainstream? Because we know if she ever ended up on that debate stage, things would have gotten very chaotic very quickly, and it would have ruined Carney's chances. Kind of similarly to what we saw with Tulsi Gabbard and Kamala Harris, where Tulsi completely sank Kamala's bid for president back in 2020. I think a similar thing would have happened to Mark Carney, because we've seen him in all these different interviews, right? The minute he gets pushed on anything that he's not expecting to be hit with, he folds like a cheap suit. So seeing what Dhalla would have done to him on that debate stage, they had to keep him away from her. And to see things like this on CBC saying, yeah, this was a good thing. Glad that we're moving on from her because she was a little too chaotic. Again, his head scratching leaves me scratching my head as well with this Liberal Party. And to continue on with that narrative and to continue on with the stuff I've been seeing lately, especially when it surrounds the Ruby Dhalla stuff and then other things, the Liberal Party is getting more brazen. They're getting more bold in how they view candidates and how they view politics and how they want to conduct their party moving forward. I'm going to show another video here with Stevie Bryan, who's worked as a chief of staff for multiple cabinet members in the Liberal Party. And again, this whole Ruby Dhalla situation was brought up on Power and Politics, and this was her advocacy for what should have happened with Ruby.
Ruby Dhalla, who we are hoping to have on the show maybe tomorrow, is going to go into that debate on Monday and without the translation, and again on Tuesday, and she is going to attack the front runner pretty aggressively. Like, she brings a very interesting, based on what she's doing on social media, that is my impression. What kind of a dynamic does it
I certainly
create?
hope that the party finds a legitimate reason to disqualify her candidacy before the debates.
Really?
I hope so. I think that, we've got a serious campaign. Canadians are looking for a serious leader. I think that's one of the reasons that Carney is doing very well. I would really hate for us to lose, as a partisan, to lose that momentum because someone's trying to turn the debates into a circus.
That's a tough thing to do. Yeah. I mean, they've already disqualified Chandra Arya, right?
I hope they find a legitimate reason to disqualify Ruby Dhalla. And this was before they ended up disqualifying her. Right in broad daylight, saying, I hope they find a way to legitimately disqualify her because she would turn that debate stage into a circus. No. Let's try to reword that a little bit. No, she would turn that debate stage and highlight the issues that Canadians actually care about. And I would say even some in the Liberal Party actually care about, and it would make your guy look terrible. And she said it there at the end, and it would risk us deflating the momentum that we've had as a party with Mark Carney. People can continue to talk about the issue of coronation versus election, and this is 100% a coronation. And we continue to see this rhetoric being spewed on different CBC shows or different CBC personalities. People who are given the airtime on CBC or given airtime in MSM, where they keep showing their hand in a lot of ways of what they want to see and what they want to have happen. So much so, we see that with Mark Critch from This Hour's 22 Minutes, where he posted this the other day, where he posted Pierre Poilievre's posts about Mark Carney. And Pierre Poilievre posted, Sneaky Carney said in BC in English that he'll use emergency federal powers to force provinces to accept big projects. In French, he says he will not force projects on unwilling provinces. Sneaky. And he posts a CBC article to support his point there. And so Mark Critch screenshots those and says, a guy who is constantly sharing CBC stories warns Canadians not to believe CBC. And I just found this to be a very dishonest and disingenuous approach, especially coming from someone who calls himself a comedian, whose job is supported by the CBC, aka the taxpayers. It's this type of take and it's this type of rhetoric that continues to infect the rest of our country and how we view our politics, and especially how we view different parties. I took issue with this post and I made sure to respond to it and saying, it's called using the language of the group you are trying to address. Typically, the brains of the folks on that side of the aisle turn off even if they are confronted with a National Post article. You have to use the other side's proof text to open minds. And this whole gotcha campaign that's going on the left, where they, make fun of Poilievre every time he cites an MSM article or a CBC article. And it's not like he's saying, I want to get rid of the CBC. He's saying, I want to defund the CBC. It needs to be able to stand on its own two legs. And the argument is like, well, it's a centrist broadcaster. It gets the real information out of Canadians that Canadians need to know. And it's like, well, you keep covering topics with a specific slant. That's no longer in the interest of taxpayers. You're no longer fulfilling your mandate that you claim to be fulfilling. You are now like any other media entity. You present the news with a slant, and that's okay. Just tell us, be upfront. Don't lie to us saying you have centrist views and you don't lean to one party or the other, because it's simply not true. And so with all this distractions and all these issues that are going on, Tiff Macklem of the Bank of Canada dropped some crazy news on Friday about the reality of where our economy sits and what we could face with Trump tariffs.
Unlike the pandemic, if tariffs persist, there will be no economic bounce back. Long-lasting tariffs mean lower potential output because our economy works less efficiently. What does this all mean for economic growth? Well, in our January projection with no tariffs, we forecast growth of about 1.8% in both 2025 and 2026. But in the tariff scenario, the level of Canadian output falls almost 3% over 2 years. That's the blue line. That implies tariffs would all but wipe out growth in the economy for those 2 years. Finally, a trade conflict would push up prices even as demand weakens. Retaliatory tariffs on U.S. exports to Canada feed into the consumer price index. Roughly 13% of Canada's CPI basket is made up of goods imported from the United States. The depreciation of the Canadian dollar also increases the cost of all imported goods and services. Finally, integrated supply chains means tariffs can add costs at multiple stages of production. tariffs would temporarily push inflation above 2%. If the economy is on a lower path and there's upward pressure on inflation, what's the response of monetary policy in the Bank of Canada? I know that's what everybody really wants to know. What can I say? What the bank can do is we can help the economy adjust. With inflation now back around the 2% target, we are better positioned to contribute to economic stability. However, with a single instrument, our policy interest rate, we can't lean against weaker output and higher inflation at the same time. As we consider our monetary policy response, we will need to carefully assess the downward pressure on inflation from weakness in the economy against the upward pressure on inflation from higher import prices and supply chain disruptions.
Unlike the pandemic, if tariffs persist, there will be no bounce back. That is the reality our economy really faces. And this is why I really wanted to kind of do a juxtaposition, compare and contrast of the real issues people are having versus the clown show that is going on in our media, where they want to say, look over here, what's happening? Again, the whole Wizard of Oz. And they want to laugh in your face about how you can do nothing about them coronating Carney. That's who you're going to get. And you're going to have to do two things about it. Absolutely nothing and like it. And this is why I just want to kind of take a break from all that nonsense and move to the real issues that are happening. Tiff Macklem sounding the alarm, being if we get hit with tariffs, we get the worst of two scenarios. One, our production's already low. And typically when production is low, that means the economy is slowing. And that means inflation is coming down because you have more unemployment, people don't have as much money to spend, this, that, the other. Demand decreases for goods. And so you can kind of then start putting in measures to start increasing demand and encouraging spending. But in this scenario, two things happen. When you get hit with tariffs, you still see more unemployment. People still don't have any money. And on top of that, instead of inflation coming down, inflation will still go up because we've been put in a very precarious situation where we've relied so heavily in the United States, we haven't got any of our resources to other markets. We have not diversified how we take care of business in our country. We've had the likes of Japan come forward saying, hey, can we buy LNG from you? And we said, oh, there's no business case for it. Now Japan's doing a huge, huge deal with the USA with LNG, and we're being left in the dust. And we have people like Mark Carney saying, yeah, we'll be a green energy superpower. Will we? Or will it just be more poor and you will continue to run this country in the ground like Trudeau has because you are advocating for the same policies? His green energy plan, some are saying, could run the country in $80 billion per year to roll it out with no guaranteed outcome for money to be repaid back. He calls it an investment. You spend less, invest more. All that BS, all that crap he's been throwing. Yeah, he's going to invest a heck of a lot more and see zero in return. And we in the finance world call that bad ROI. The banker's supposed to know that clearly, but he doesn't because he's a fraud. And this is just the reality. The real issue people are having is they want to improve their way of life. They want to take care of and solve the affordability crisis. That's what they want. What we're going to get more of is more green promises, more money laundering via government spending, and we will see nothing in return for it. As Carney claims to want to balance the operational budget inside 3 years and invest more, which is identical to Trudeau's platform in 2015. We'll run a deficit for the first 3 years, and then it'll balance in the fourth year. Identical what Carney wants to do. It'll take 3 years to balance the operational budget. That's where we're at. That's what we're seeing. It is egregious what we're seeing them do to Dhalla and anyone who's an outsider, a true outsider. And I think it needs noise. And I think it's important to have the noise on it. And it's good to learn a lesson for what they're doing within their own party and how they might try to do that in a general election. But we need to be reminded of what the actual issue is. Affordability, what we're facing, and how a change in face isn't going to do us any good. We need to change the full government and the party. So keep having those conversations. Let's keep pushing hard. Have yourselves a good one. I'm out.